Welcome to the Landscaping Growth Script, the authority on building your landscaping business with better leads, higher value clients, and a year-round sales pipeline. Here's your host, landscape industry marketing expert, Katy Doss.
Welcome back to the Landscaping Growth Script, where we help landscaping business owners attract better clients and build predictable year-round growth. I'm your host, Katy Doss of Script Marketing, and every week we unpack the ideas, strategies, and stories behind exceptional landscaping businesses. Today, we're talking about something that happens to every landscaping business, but almost nobody actually investigates. You lose a bid. Maybe it was a big design build project that you were really excited about. Maybe it was a maintenance account you thought was kind of a lock. Maybe it was six figures. Maybe it was small. Either way, the homeowner goes quiet, or they send you a short, polite email, and that's the end of it. And here's what I see happens next almost every time. Nothing. No investigation, no follow-up question, no internal review. Just a mental shrug and a story that kind of fills in the blank. They went with the cheaper guy, or they didn't really know what they wanted, or it just wasn't the right fit. Maybe that's the case, or maybe not. Because here's the truth. Most landscaping business owners don't actually know why they lose bids. They have a theory, they have a guess, but they don't have data. And when you don't know why you're losing, you can't fix it. You just keep running the exact same process and hoping for a different result. So today, we're doing something a little different. We're not talking about marketing tactics or positioning. We're talking about diagnostics, how to actually find out why you lost a job, both from the client side and from your own internal process. By the end of this episode, you are going to have a real system, how to ask the client the right question at the right time, what to do when they ghost you completely, and how to audit your own sales process so you're not relying on guesswork. This is a meaty one, so let's get into it. And a quick note before we dive in. We have put together a corresponding document, a free lost job diagnostic guide to go along with this episode. It walks you through what I'm going to talk about, the exact questions to ask clients in each scenario we're about to cover, plus a simple way to track lost bids over time so you start seeing patterns instead of one-off guesses. So grab that at scriptmarketingcode.com/resources, and we'll circle back to it again at the end. Okay, let's start with the obvious move, the one most owners have tried at least once. You lose a job, and maybe you send the potential client something like, hey, would you mind sharing why you decided to go in another direction? And what do you get back? We just went with someone in our budget, or the timing wasn't right, or we decided to hold off for now. Those are polite, but they're vague and they are completely useless for you and your business. And it's not because the homeowner's being difficult. It's because you asked them to justify a decision they've already made. And most people don't want to sit there and explain in detail why they didn't pick you. It feels a little icky, right? It feels a little confrontational, even when they don't mean it that way. So they give you the soft, safe answer and the conversation ends. If they give you an answer at all, which we're going to talk about in a second. If you want a real signal instead of a courtesy kind of non-answer, the question itself that you are asking that potential client has to change. And more than that, your whole approach has to change. Because a lot of the most useful information that you're going to get is not going to come from the client at all. It's going to come from looking at your own process with real honesty. So we're going to break this into two parts. First, how to get whatever intel you can from the client when you can get it. And second, the deeper piece is how to run a real internal audit of your own sales process, because that's where most of these answers actually live. Okay, so let's get into part one. That is getting intel from the client when you can. There are really three scenarios that you run into after you lose a bid, right? The client gives you the brush off answer, or the client disappears entirely, or they tell you flat out that you were too expensive. Those are generally the three responses you get. And each one needs a different response from you. The first is the brush off. This is the most common outcome, and it's the one most owners get wrong in trying to get information. Look, the client, I don't care who they are, they always feel a little guilty about not choosing you. They don't want an awkward exchange. So when you ask them, basically, why didn't you choose us? They give you something generic and move on. So the fix here isn't necessarily a better first question. It's a smarter follow-up that makes it easy for them to be specific without feeling like they're criticizing you to their face. So instead of asking them to justify the decision they've made, frame it as helping you get better. So something closer to, hey, Ms. Smith, totally understand you went in a different direction. We appreciate the opportunity to do the quote for you. We're always trying to improve our process. Was there anything about our proposal or the way we approached it that felt off, even something small? That framing does two things. It takes the pressure off. You're not asking them to defend their choice. You're asking them to help you. And it gives them permission to name something small without it feeling like a personal attack on the person who sat across from them at their kitchen table. And look, most of the time you are not going to get a long answer, but you will often get one real sentence, something like, the other company got back to us faster and their proposal was more detailed and it felt like they really listened to me more. And that sentence is worth 10 polite non-answers. All right, let's talk about the ghost. Unfortunately, sometimes that potential client just disappears. They decide they're not going to go with you, and instead of having the uncomfortable email exchange saying, hey, thanks for your time, we decided to go in another direction, they just go away, right? They don't respond to your email. They don't respond to a follow-up call. We don't like it, but it happens. It's honestly one of the hardest scenarios because there's no data coming from that client at all. Here's the important thing. Don't chase it. A second or third touch trying to pry an answer out of somebody who's already checked out usually just reads as pushy. It's not going to generate anything useful, and it can actually damage how they remember their exchange with you. So when someone ghosts you, log it and move on. But this is the key. Don't treat it as a dead end. Treat it as a signal to look at your own data instead of theirs, which is exactly what we're going to cover in part 2 of this episode. Where in your process did they go quiet? Was it right after the proposal landed? Was it right after the site visit? That timing tracked across enough lost bids becomes the diagnostic, even without a single word from the client. Okay, the third thing that potential clients often say when you lose a bid is what? Let's all say it together. You were too expensive. This one feels like the easy case, and most owners treat it that way, right? You hear too expensive, you write it down as the reason, and you move on. But too expensive is rarely just about the number. It's almost always shorthand for, I didn't see enough difference between you and the other option to justify the gap in price. So instead of accepting it at face value, ask one more question when you talk to them. Something like, out of curiosity, what did the other estimate include? Or was there anything about the other company's approach that stood out to you? That single follow-up tells you whether this was a pure price decision. And look, sometimes it genuinely is, and that's fine. And the client may not have been the right fit anyway. They may not have had any idea how much landscaping costs. It happens. But it could also have been a value perception problem, meaning they didn't understand what they were actually getting for the difference in price, which is a completely different issue with a completely different fix. So that's part 1. How do you get some diagnostic information from the client? Part 2 is your internal audit. Here's the thing about client feedback. Even when you get it, it's incomplete, right? Clients are not going to walk you through every detail of what happened in your sales process that they didn't like. They're not going to say, Your salesperson only asked me about square footage and never asked why I actually wanted the space to feel like. Maybe they will, but for the most part, they won't. They don't think in those terms. They walk away from a meeting with a feeling, and that feeling drives the decision. Which means if you really want to know why you're losing jobs, a lot of the answer isn't out there with the client. It's inside your own process. And this is the part most landscaping businesses skip entirely because it requires looking honestly at your own team, your own timeline, and your own materials. So before we get into what to actually look for, let's talk about how you get the information you're going to look at. Because most of this audit, as it stands right now, relies on memory, and memory is unreliable. You think the meeting went well, you think you asked good questions, but you are relying on your own recollection or your written notes, which is exactly when people miss the most. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to start recording your sales calls. Yes, when they're in person. It doesn't need to be complicated. The voice recorder on your phone works just fine, or you can grab like an inexpensive dedicated recorder if you want something, more reliable or something that can like transcribe the conversation. Just make sure you ask the homeowner's permission first before you record, and that's simple to weave into the conversation. Something like, hey, do you mind if I record this conversation? I want to make sure I don't miss anything you tell me. That one sentence does double duty. It gives you a real record to listen back to instead of relying on your notes or relying on your memory. And it also signals something important to the homeowner right there in that moment, that you care enough about getting their project right that you don't want to trust your memory or your chicken scratch written notes. That's a trust builder in itself on top of everything you learn from listening back later. So once you have a handful of these recordings, you have real data to run the rest of this audit against, not guessing about how this sales call probably went. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to listen back to a call where you didn't get the job. Now, of course, if you get the job, the call is equally as important because you're not going to miss any little detail. But if you didn't get a job, you're going to listen back to the call and you're going to ask yourself honestly, did your salesperson ask about specs only, square footage, materials, budget range, or did they also ask how the homeowner envisions using the space? What they're hoping it feels like once it's finished, what problem they're actually trying to solve. This matters because, as I have said 100 times on this podcast, homeowners aren't buying specs. They're buying an outcome. If the only questions asked were just logical, down and dirty spec information, the client walks away feeling like they're just another number, another quote. But if the questions went deeper into how they want to live in the space, the client walks away feeling like they were understood. And those are two very different experiences. And only one of them makes a homeowner feel like paying more might be worth it. Okay, so up next, when we're looking at jobs you lost, we're going to look at speed and responsiveness. And this has a lot of nuance to it that owners miss. So we're going to be careful here. How long was the turnaround from the meeting to any kind of follow-up? Was there a same day or next day recap email? Did anyone ask a clarifying question or two after the meeting based on something specific the client mentioned? Or did it go completely silent until the proposal itself showed up however many days or weeks later? Now, here's the nuance. And I talked about this in my pool episode. Fast isn't always the goal. It depends on what you're actually delivering. For a smaller job, a quick turnaround of a quote matters a pretty good bit, right? But for a large design build project, rushing out a proposal the next day can actually work against you. It can make the whole thing feel like a template, not a plan considered specifically for this property. What builds trust instead, and what can play a big role in getting you the job, is being fast to follow up, but patient to deliver. Here's what I mean. A same day or next day email that says something, after you've met with the client, that says something like, Really enjoyed talking through the space with you. Had one follow-up question about how you're planning to use kind of the back corner near the fence line. That shows the client you're already thinking about their project specifically. You want to make sure that you are following up with a recap of what you discussed, and this is much easier to do when you've recorded the conversation. Then, the actual proposal can take a little bit of time. It genuinely needs to be built well. So that combination, quick, thoughtful follow-up, followed by a considered proposal, builds far more confidence with your potential client than either a rushed proposal or total silence for 3 weeks. Next, when we're looking at jobs you lost, we want to take a look at the proposal itself. We want to see what you're actually sending. Is it a generic line item quote in a Word document, or does it visibly reflect the conversation that you had? Does it reference specific things the client said, which, by the way, is a lot easier to do well if you recorded that call, or is it a standard scope of work that could apply to almost any property? Does it include anything visual, photos of comparable work, a rendering, anything that makes it feel considered rather than templated? A proposal that echoes the client's own words back to them. Something like, you mentioned wanting a space where the kids could still run around, but you could also entertain in the evening, so here's how we're approaching that. That reads completely differently than a bulleted list of materials and square footage. One feels like it was built specifically for that client. The other feels interchangeable with anybody else's bid. So the next thing we're going to look at when we look at lost bids is job type pattern diagnosis. I want you to take a step back and look at the pattern across multiple lost bids, not just one at a time. What kind of jobs are you actually losing? Are they the smaller jobs you didn't really want anyway? In which case, losing a few of those might not be a real problem at all. Or are you losing hardscape inclusive projects specifically? Are you losing a certain price tier? Are you losing a certain type of client? This reframes we're losing bids from a vague statement into a specific fixable pattern. And here's the part that's a little uncomfortable to say out loud. Sometimes a business is unconsciously sabotaging the jobs it doesn't actually want. So think about it. Whether you are the salesperson or you have a dedicated salesperson, if you're kind of lukewarm about a job, maybe it's too small, maybe the property's a headache, or the client doesn't feel like a great fit, that lukewarm energy shows up. Maybe there's less prep, maybe fewer questions, maybe a slower follow-up, not necessarily on purpose, but it happens, and it quietly costs you jobs you were never that excited about in the first place. So if this pattern shows up in your audit, the fix isn't try harder on every job. It's getting genuinely clear on your ideal project criteria so your team knows which jobs are worth their full effort, and you stop being surprised when you lose the ones you secretly didn't want anyway. Okay, so next we're going to talk about competitive intel. Who actually won the job that you lost? Sometimes this comes up naturally in the conversation that you have with the homeowner. Other times, it's a casual, low-stakes ask. Just curious, who did you end up going with, if you don't mind me asking? Most people will tell you. It's really not a sensitive question. It's just one nobody bothers to ask. The same 2 or 3 competitors keep showing up in these answers. That's worth a real look. Are they winning on price or speed? Or how they're positioning themselves, what are they doing for their marketing, all of those things. That's a natural place to pull in a proper competitor audit. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet about competitor audits, go back and check that one out because it pairs directly with what you find here. So once you have established how you're talking to these potential clients, the questions you're asking after you lose a bid, you're looking at your internal processes, you're recording your sales call, all of that. How do you build a system so that you can really start diagnosing why you're losing jobs? All of this only works if it's consistent, not something you do occasionally when that loss really stings. So let's talk about how to build this into your business. First is the timing. Reach out within 24 to 48 hours of finding out you didn't get the job, or reply to the email or the phone call or whatever. This is something that you as the owner need to do, not the salesperson who worked with them if it's a different person. But you want to make sure that you're reaching out quickly. Any later and the details might get fuzzy and that kind of thing. So timing is crucial here. Next is the format. Send a short, casual email rather than making a phone call. A call kind of raises the stakes, makes it easier for somebody to dodge the call and that kind of thing. An email lets somebody respond on their own time with a lot less social pressure, which actually increases your odds of getting some real intel back. Number 3, and I talked about this just a second ago, who sends it matters. So if possible, you want the client follow-up to not come from the same salesperson who pitched the client, who went on the sales call. Clients are more likely to be honest with somebody slightly removed from the relationship. The same way we talked about in that client satisfaction survey episode, it creates a little separation that makes that candor a little bit easier. And last is track it. 1 lost bid tells you almost nothing. 10 lost bids with the same theme tells you exactly where to look at your business. Build a simple lost bid log. The stage they dropped off, whatever the reason they gave you, what your internal audit revealed, and who won the work if you know it. Over time, that log becomes the real diagnostic, far more useful than any single conversation. So you may be thinking, ooh, is all of this worth all the time it's going to take? And that's the thing. Recording calls, asking better discovery questions, sending a thoughtful follow-up before a proposal, building out a lost bid tracking log, that's more time and effort per lead than most of you are currently putting in, and you are already strapped for time. But here's the reframe. You're not trying to win every single job that comes across your desk. You're trying to win more of the jobs you actually want. The ones with the right scope, the right client, and the right margins. If a slightly slower, more considered sales process raises your win rate specifically on those jobs, the extra time isn't a cost. It's the highest leverage thing you can spend time on because it's not just about winning more, it's about winning better. So let's recap this together. Most landscaping business owners don't actually know why they lose bids. They blame the client, assume it was all about price, or just shrug and move on. And that guesswork means the same problem quietly repeats itself. Today, we talked about getting real intel from the clients when you can, reframing the brush off, knowing when to stop chasing a ghost, and digging 1 layer deeper when somebody says too expensive. We talked about running a full internal audit, recording your sales calls, examining your discovery questions, rethinking speed versus patience, auditing your proposal itself, spotting patterns in the jobs you're losing, and finding out who's actually winning the work. Building this into an actual system, the right timing, the right format, the right person asking, and a simple log that turns individual losses into real patterns. And finally, you have to accept that yes, this takes time, but it's time spent winning more of the work you actually want instead of just winning more work, period. Once you start running this kind of diagnostic consistently, you'll probably start to see 1 or 2 reasons show up again and again. And when that happens, that is a great problem to have because now you know what to fix instead of just guessing at it. That next question, what to actually do about the reason you keep losing, is a conversation for a future episode. But it all starts here with actually knowing what's going on instead of assuming. Don't forget, we've got that free lost job diagnostic guide waiting for you at scriptmarketingco.com/resources to help you put all of this into practice. That's a wrap for today. I'm your host, Katy Doss of Script Marketing, where we help landscaping businesses attract better clients and build predictable year-round growth. If you've got questions or ideas for a future episode, we always want to hear those. Email us at info@scriptmarketingco.com. We'll see you next week for more strategies from the Landscaping Growth Script.
You've been listening to the Landscaping Growth Script with Katy Doss. To learn more about building predictable, year-round growth for your landscaping business, visit scriptmarketingco.com.